Good afternoon, everyone. This is the lecture for Module 76 on group behavior, but we're actually going to start towards the end of Module 75 with what we did not finish in class today. Milgram's study of obedience. Super important study. Milgram was fascinated and horrified by the idea that ordinary Germans could commit such atrocities during the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. So this was just about 10, 15 years after the Holocaust ended in the late 50s that he devised his own experiment to kind of test to see what would happen if you replicated even a tiny fraction of it here in America. So he put, as you can see in this picture over here, he put that man who's strapped down is actually a Confederate. He's someone who's working along with the researcher. They put him in a chair and they said that you, as you're the teacher, quote unquote, you have to shock him every time he gets a question wrong. Now he intentionally got questions wrong, and as we'll see going on to the next slide, about 80% of the people gave strong shocks to the person, meaning that when they intentionally got a question wrong, that each time you got a question wrong, you had to give a higher and higher shock. And even though they saw how inhumane it was, because they were being told to, because the experimenter told the participant, told who was the teacher in this experiment, that you have to keep shocking every time the person gets it wrong, they kept giving shocks. And then if we keep going on this slide, you'll see that more than 60% were still giving shocks, all the way to beyond the extreme danger level. Some of this could be the foot in the door effect that we learned last week, right? That because they started over here, as long as they started already, then it didn't take so much more to convince them to keep going. But a large part of it was this concept of obedience, that for whatever reason, we obey people who are, well, let's look at some criteria. We obey people who appear to be legitimate authority figures. So a researcher for sure would qualify as that. The authority figure is supported by a prestigious institution. This was at Yale, I believe. The victim was depersonalized. This happened both in the Holocaust and in the study, that the victim was in another room, you couldn't hear them. And there were no role models for defiance. There was no one else. If there was even one other person saying, no, I refuse to go any further, I refuse to shock this person. They don't deserve to get shocked just for getting a question wrong on a psychology experiment. If even one person would do that, then other quote-unquote teachers were also likely to defy the authority. So, as we said, this explains to some extent, explains some of the horrors of the Holocaust, explains how ordinary people could be corrupted and manipulated by different situations. Obviously, everyone is still responsible for their actions. That's what the Nuremberg trials established after the Holocaust, saying I was just following orders is never an excuse to commit inhumane atrocities. But for us in psychology, at the very least, it helps us explain how this could happen in the first place, how an otherwise normal, ordinary person would go along just because they're being told to do something. There was a great episode of SVU. It was the last episode that Robin Williams was in of Law & Order SVU, where he actually said his name was Dr. Milgram. And he told people he called different fast food chains and told them to tie up their workers because he was a policeman coming to investigate. Obviously that wasn't true, but just like in the real study, many people listened to this unnamed, anonymous voice on the phone telling them to do something. All right, now we're going to move on to our new module for tonight, group behavior. We're going to talk about some other influences on individuals and their behavior. First one is social facilitation, which is, as you can see here, the improved performance on simple or well-learned individual tasks in the presence of others. And the reason why is because when we become more emotionally aroused, it strengthens our most likely response. So for someone who's really good at basketball or baseball, they're really good at a sport, they're going to do better in front of a cheering crowd than they would by themselves in practice. So let's say instead of getting 7 out of 10 free throws in, they'll get 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 when they're in front of an actual game. For me, who is not very athletic, if I were playing basketball, let's say I got 30% of my free throws in, in practice, during an actual game, I might get only 1 out of 10 or even less in because it strengthens our most likely response. So my most likely response, since I'm not good at something, is going to be to do poorly, so I'm going to do even worse. But someone who's really good at something, whether it be sports or lecturing or any activity, they're going to do better in front of a crowd. So social facilitation is doing better on tasks that you're good at in front of other people. The opposite is not in your book, so pay attention here. The opposite is social inhibition, which is the decreased performance on difficult tasks in the presence of others. That would be the example of me, getting 3 out of 10 free throws in during practice and only 1 out of 10 in a game. Because it's something I'm already bad at, so when I'm in front of other people, I'm going to do even worse. All right, this concept, you might not know this word, but you definitely know this concept, social loafing. The tendency for people in a group to exert less effort when pooling their efforts towards a common goal as opposed to being individually accountable. In this example here, you see there's 3 people assigned to paint this room, 2 of them are working hard, and 1 guy is just here chilling in the corner. The reasons why is because people view themselves as less accountable and more dispensable. So think about a group project that maybe you've done here at Maspeth High School. 4 of you were assigned to a group, and if you were assigned to do it individually, all 4 of you would have had to do it. But since it's a group, maybe 1 or 2 of you are working hard, and the other couple of you are just kind of hanging out, doing minimal effort. The larger the group is, the more social loafing there will be. If there were 8 people in a group, there would be even more social loafing. Then ultimately only 2, 3, maybe 4 would do it, and you'd have a handful of people just kind of relaxing, not doing much. All right, de-individuation is our next term. De-individuation, the loss of self-awareness and self-restraint occurring in group situations that foster arousal and anonymity. So the anonymity is a key word there, because it's even in the name, de-individuation. You don't feel like an individual anymore. You feel like you're lost in a crowd. It happens, as you see in the picture, it could happen in a riot, when people are, they kind of feel lost in the crowd of the riot. They may have even wearing masks, and they kind of just go along. It's almost a subconscious thing that you're going along with the crowd, not thinking about yourself, not thinking about what you're doing or your actions. Someone who may smash a window or attack a police officer might do it in the midst of their aroused state during a riot, but would never do such a thing on their own. So arousal and anonymity are 2 key terms. Cyberbullying is another example, right? When we hide behind a computer screen, especially if there's like a fake username we're using, and we're talking to a lot of people at once, so we feel like we're kind of like in a large group. We feel anonymous. We're not focused on ourselves. There's a lot of arousal sometimes. We're very emotionally hyped up when we're talking online. That could lead to cyberbullying. Would be another example of de-individuation. Now, group polarization is another term, which is the enhancement of a group's prevailing inclinations through discussion within the group. So the example your book gives, that we have in this picture here, is we took people who, they answered a survey on the level of prejudice. And we assigned these numbers from -4 to +4 is whatever the scale they used. So the people who naturally had low prejudice were put in a room together to have like an hour-long conversation. Their level of prejudice actually decreased over the course of that hour. People who are naturally a little bit more prejudiced, their average level of prejudice increased over the course of the hour because they were talking to each other. They were talking to people who shared their beliefs. And so the more you talk to someone who agrees with you, the stronger you feel about those beliefs. Same thing would happen if you put, let's say last year before the election, you put all Hillary Clinton supporters in one room and all Donald Trump supporters in another. The more they talk to each other, the more they're focusing on the pros of their candidate and the cons of the other candidate. They'll leave that room after that hour feeling even more strongly about their candidate than when they came in. Another example would be here, like online. This happens all the time. If you are only Facebook friends with people who you agree with politically and you only read those stories in your news feed, then you're going to feel even more strongly about those positions afterwards. All right, groupthink. Groupthink is not to be confused with de-individuation and not to be confused with conformity. is the mode of thinking that occurs when the decision for harmony in a decision-making group overrides a realistic appraisal of alternatives. So the doubts are self-censored. The difference between this and de-individuation is that we're actually sitting down and having a conversation about something. We're not just like acting off impulse and rioting or cyberbullying. Those would be de-individuation. Groupthink was sitting around a room and, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about let's have a party this weekend. Maybe you'll sit with your friends at lunch and have that conversation. Yeah, it's a great idea. And then I'll get this for the party, and let's see whose parents aren't home, and we'll do this. We'll buy this substance, and we'll buy this drink, or whatever it may be. We'll invite 100 people. We'll invite 300 people, and you all get so excited, right? Let's say they're planning this party right here. You all get so excited in that planning process that you're not conforming. It's not like this guy is sitting there thinking, gee whiz, I think her idea isn't very good, we're all going to get in trouble. He's not thinking that. He's unconsciously like self-censoring his own doubts. No one in there is like saying, oh, I'm afraid to speak up. They're also enthused with the idea that they're only thinking about the pros, not the cons. So in that sense, it's kind of related to group polarization. But groupthink is when the group itself reaches this agreement unanimously, and no one's raising the hey, maybe it's not the best idea, because no one's thinking about that. Some famous examples are the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, the Challenger explosion back in the 80s, when people, in that case government officials, were so excited about those respective plans that they didn't think, well, hey, this might not work so well, maybe there'll be a counterattack, or maybe the ship's not ready to launch into orbit. They just focus on the positives, not the realistic appraisal of things that might go wrong. All right, so we don't want to depress you after all this conversation about the way in which groups control us. Ultimately, we are responsible for our own actions, and we have control over our own actions. Social control is everything we've discussed so far, how conformity and obedience affects you, and groupthink, group polarization, de-individuation, social facilitation, social inhibition. All of those things do affect us, but we still do have our personal control, the power of the individual. And there's even the concept of minority influence. Sometimes even just one person, like Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, one person whose ideas might not be popular at the time. If that person sticks true to their feelings and their convictions, they can influence positive change over the majority. All right, culture is a term that comes up in many different units. We've defined it before. We'll define it again. The enduring behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, and traditions that are shared by a group of people from one generation to the next. The reason that's important in social psychology is that norms are different in different cultures. A norm is an understood rule for accepted and expected behavior. Norms are not moral. It's not immoral or wrong to violate a norm from some moralistic sense. It's just not done. If you think about the way we greet each other, some cultures you greet by shaking hands, other cultures you greet by hugging or even kissing. Think about pace of life. Think about New York versus Texas. In Texas or anywhere in the South, people walk more slowly. Things happen more slowly. It might take you twice as long to check out at a convenience store, but no one really minds. That's just how it's done here. And this time of year on the holidays, up in New York, you have a lot of tourists, and I can speak for myself. I get annoyed sometimes walking the streets of Manhattan when I get stuck behind some slow person from out of town, because we just have different norms. Their norm is to walk at one speed. Our norm is to walk at a different speed. And so, but it's just fascinating to think about violating norms, even though you're not breaking any law, actual laws or morals. It's very rarely done. We usually do stick to our norms. Finally, norms change not just place to place, but also generation to generation. Think about yourselves and parents, grandparents, maybe even older siblings. With such a rapid change of technology, it's possible that norms have changed even from like your 10-year-old brother or sister 10 years ago, as opposed to now. We will discuss all of these terms more tomorrow. We'll be doing an activity associated with them. Please make sure you understand all of these terms. Any questions, please comment below if that's a possibility, and let's see how this works. Thank you all.